everybody, it's Mel. Thank you so much for joining me today for a book recommendations video based on the Roll of Reads prompts. In March, I will be running a readathon which is based on my TBR game Roll of Reads. This is a game that I have been playing for a few years now, and for the last few years in March I have asked people to join me in playing the game. If you would like to join me playing Roll of Reads, then the announcement video with all of the information that you will need is linked in the description below. But very quickly, it is loosely based on Dungeons and Dragons. We have prompt cards, a 20-piece game board. You place your prompt cards out on the 20-piece game board, roll a d20, and then pick up the prompt cards and do the prompt that is on that card to help you pick the book. So I thought that I would recommend a few books for a few of the different prompts. I will not be recommending books for all of the prompts because there are something like 60 prompts, so we'd be here for a really long time. I'm also only going to recommend 2 or 3 books for each of the prompts that I do talk about because, again, otherwise we'll be here for 1,000 years. Before I go ahead and talk you through some of the books for some of the prompts, I wanted to just clarify a few things about the punishments and rewards. So in this round we have cards for punishments and rewards. If you roll a 20, that is when you get a reward and you pick up your reward card. Reward card looks like this. It has the 2 little dice down the bottom which are different shades of purple, and it has different shades of purple around the border. The punishments look like this. They have a red border and they have red and yellow dice down the bottom, as distinct from the regular cards which look like this. The way that you get your reward is you roll a 20. The way that you get a punishment is either you roll a 1 or you roll the same number 3 times. Now, some of the punishments and rewards supersede the prompt on the number. So if you roll a 1, you have to pick up a punishment card. Depending on what is on the card, it may or may not supersede the prompt that is on the card that is on the number 1 spot. So the punishment cards that is Pistachio, in case anyone is wondering. Having a very good yell because I am rudely ignoring her attempts to make me rub her belly and pick her up. So now we must have a Pistachio in the background. There she is. Thank you, Pistachio. So the punishments that supersede the prompt on the 1 space that you pick up when you roll your 1 are lowest rated on Goodreads/Storygraph. Book you've previously DNF'd, that supersedes the prompt, so don't worry about the prompt that is on that number. Same with over 450 pages long. Intimidating, same again. Any book that you think is intimidating, it doesn't have to go along with the prompt. So just ignore the prompt is on 1 or the number you rolled 3 times. And then genre you rarely read is the same again, it supersedes. On the other hand, there are some punishment cards that you will need to do the card that is on the number that you rolled. If you get one of these 4, then you need to use the prompt on that number as well. So add 2 rolls. It just means at the end of your game, say you're doing 5 rolls, you have to do 2 more. So you have to do 7 in total. You still have to do the prompt for that number. Add a roll, same again. Roll again, add prompt. So I'm going to let you choose which way you want to do this. Either you use the prompt that's already on the number and pick a book, and then you roll your d20 again and you pick up the card from whatever number it is and you add that book. This is separate from all your other normal rolls, so it's essentially the same as adding a book. Or you can combine the 2. So you can pick up the prompt on number 1, if that's the original number you rolled to get the punishment. You then roll another number, pick up the card, whatever that is, you combine the 2 and pick 1 book. It's up to you. I'm going to let you decide. And then must choose 2 books for prompt. So you must use the prompt on number 1 or the number you rolled 3 times that made you get the punishment. You must choose 2 books that fit that prompt, and then they must be in your TBR for March. And again, it basically means you're rolling you're adding another roll. So those are punishments. Now, it's a similar situation with the rewards. Some of them supersede whatever the prompt is on the number 20, and some of them are an addition to. So, remove any book. You still need to then pick up the prompt that's on the 20. You could choose to just get rid of that prompt entirely, but if you've already had to have a punishment that was over 450 pages long and you picked a book that you didn't really want to read, you can remove that book, but you still then have to do the prompt that is on the 20. If roll a 1 can re-roll, so again, you have to use the prompt. Any book you really want to read, that is a reward card that supersedes the card that's on the 20. So you then just replace the prompt with the reward prompt and use that instead. Take off 2 rolls. So you can decrease your amount of rolls you have to do by 2. Replace any prompt with a mood read. So this one is going to be up to you. If you want to, you can replace whatever prompt is on the 20 that got you this reward card with this mood read. Or you can pick up the prompt and say, oh, I don't mind that prompt. However, this other one, I had to read an intimidating book. I didn't like that, so I'm going to replace that with a mood read, and then pick a book for the prompt that's on the 20, if that makes sense. Take off 1 roll. You have to do the prompt on the 20. Replace any prompt with the host's favorite. This is a little bit of a different situation because everybody, regardless of what rewards or punishments they get throughout the game, everybody gets 1 replace any prompt that you don't like or you don't want to do. Girls, are we okay here? Shade, come on, you're okay. Good girl. Sorry, just having a little cat squabble. Then you can replace that prompt and pick a book from the host favorite. So the host favorite is a graphic that is in the Google Drive, which is down below. You can have a look and pick any book that any of the hosts have picked out, including myself, and that are in that graphic, and you can replace any prompt at all throughout the game at any point. 1 time you get to do this with a host favorite. If you get this reward card, then you get a second opportunity to do that. So again, it's up to you. You can use this instead of the prompt that is on the 20 when you roll it and get this reward card, or you can do the prompt that is on the 20 and use this to replace a book that you have already had to choose that maybe you didn't really want to read. You can replace with one of the host's favorites. Highest rated on Goodreads Storygraph, it supersedes the prompt. And then ignore same number 3 times punishment. Normally, that's a punishment. You pick up a punishment card. If you have this available to you, this reward, which you can keep throughout the game, then you don't have to. You can just ignore that. However, the reward roll that you got this reward card on when you rolled your 20 is still counted as a roll. So you still have to do the prompt that is on that 20 space. So I hope that all made sense. I hope that clarifies things a little bit. So now I'm just going to go through and give you a few different recommendations for books that will fit some of the prompts for Roll of Reads for 2024. Like I said before, all the information about how to play the game, how to get involved, the giveaway, the Discord, all of those things are linked down below. So if you want all of that information, please go ahead and check out the description, check out that announcement video so that you can get involved. So I've decided to pick out a few prompts that have been talked about a little bit in the Discord as being a little bit tricky, that people were struggling to find books that might fit, or they weren't really wanting to get those prompts as they seem like they might be giving people a little bit of grief. So yeah, that's what we're going to do. Alright, so first of all, the prompt First Nations author. So here in Australia, we have an Indigenous population to Australia who were here before Australia was colonised by the British. So we have a First Nations population, many of which are authors and write amazing books. So that is what encouraged me to put this specifically as a prompt. There is also a prompt to read a book by a BIPOC author, so a Black person, an Indigenous person, or a person of colour, which means that you can still choose an Indigenous person then, but this one specifically is for someone who is a First Nations author. So that means that you can choose an Australian First Nations author, or you can choose a First Nations author from a different part of the world. So you might choose a First Nations American author or Canadian author. It's up to you. Today, I'm going to recommend a few different Australian First Nations authors who I think are amazing and who I think that you could potentially read any book of theirs for this prompt. So I've actually chosen a few different books that I'm just going to recommend, but any of these authors and any other book would also work, obviously. So first up we have The Yield by Tara June Winch. So this book is about a woman who was living in the UK and she comes back to Australia. We also have a bunch of different interconnecting storylines. So her grandfather is writing a dictionary of his language, and so we have excerpts from that dictionary. We also have a diary of one of the first European British settlers. So we get a range of different perspectives about the area in which this family are from, and which this woman has gone back to. I really enjoyed this one. I thought it was incredibly well written. I would definitely recommend. Apologies if you can hear the noise in the background. That is the ice maker. Then I have After Story by Larissa Brent. It is a little bit similar to The Yield, except that we don't have the excerpts from different mediums, but we do swap between different perspectives. So we have a young woman and then her mother, and they have a variety of different things that have happened in their past, which they are deconstructing throughout the story. And it is about this young woman, she's in her probably late 20s, so woman, who has studied English literature at university, and she wants to go on this tour around England to visit all the different places where the different authors are from and different books are set. And she decides to invite her mum. Her mum doesn't really have any experience in English literature and classics. She doesn't really understand why her daughter's invited her, but she really wants to reconnect with her daughter, so they go on this trip together, and it's about them just trying to figure each other out and find each other again and come to terms with some of the things that have happened in their past. I think it's absolutely fantastic. I think Larissa Brent is an amazing author. Definitely enjoy her writing style, so I highly recommend that you go and check out anything that she's written for this prompt. Then we have The Boy from the Mish by Gary Lonesborough. This is a young adult contemporary, and it is about I think he's about 16 or 17-year-old boy called Jackson, who lives in a mission in New South Wales, an Indigenous mission. And then his aunt comes for Christmas with all of her children and also a foster child. Jackson and this foster boy, Thomas, realise they have feelings for each other, and it's about them figuring that out, figuring out how to be queer within Indigenous Australia, what that means, and yeah, just kind of bit of a coming of age, finding yourself story. It is incredibly well written and just really feels really real. I really, really enjoyed this book and I highly recommend it. There are so many incredible Australian Indigenous authors that I could highly recommend that you pick up any book from. Some other Australian First Nations authors, we have Stan Grant and Berlin Quamelina. We have Anita Heiss. We have Bruce Pascoe. We have Alexis Wright, Melissa Lukashenko. There are so many incredible Australian First Nations authors. So if any of those books that I've talked about, or if you aren't interested in any of those, have a look at some of these other authors and hopefully you will find something. Of course, as I said, feel free to find other First Nations authors from around the world, but these are just some recommendations for you for that prompt. So I'm going to move from there straight into the prompt Australian author, because obviously all of the people that I talked about for First Nations, Australian Indigenous authors are Australian authors. So any of those authors would work for the Australian authors as well. But I do have a few other incredible Australian authors that I wanted to mention. So first up we have The Book Thief by Marcus Zusak. So you may not be aware, but Marcus Zusak is in fact an Australian author, and The Book Thief is probably his most famous book. This is about a young girl called Liesel in the Second World War in Germany. Her mother isn't doing very well, so she is taking her daughter Liesel to be fostered. It is about Liesel's story. Liesel starts picking up books that she finds, and so she is the book thief. And a range of different things happen. It is a really, really well written story. It's actually told from the perspective of Death. So Death is the main narrator, which I think is an incredible, really interesting way of doing things, and I really, really enjoyed that aspect of it. But yeah, it's just an exploration of the Second World War in Germany, of being German or just being a regular German citizen and kind of what experiences they had. There's also a little bit of discussion about Jewish situation in Germany at the time, and yeah, it was really, really well written and really interesting, so I would recommend that as a book written by an Australian author, or anything else by Marcus Zusak as well, of course. Then we have The Dry by Jane Harper. This is the first in a series, which is the Aaron Falk series. This is a mystery, and The Dry follows Aaron Falk, who is a detective for the financial part of the Federal Police. So Aaron lives in Melbourne and he goes back to his hometown in country Victoria because his oldest friend from home has died. He has killed himself and he has also killed his family. So Aaron goes back for the funeral, and then the parents of this friend of his aren't convinced that that's what happened. They think something else is going on, and so they convince Aaron to stay around and to try and figure out what's going on. And Aaron is staying and trying to help the local detective to figure out what's actually going on and if everything is how it seems. We also switch back to when Aaron and this other guy were friends in high school, and something suspicious that happened then as well. So we get the two different timelines. I really, really enjoyed this book. I enjoyed the other two books in the trilogy as well, but I really enjoyed The Dry. I thought it was absolutely fantastic. Then we have Jessica Townsend, who is an Australian author, and she wrote the Nevermore series, which is a series of middle grade fantasy series. We follow Morrigan Crow, and Morrigan Crow is a cursed child who believes that when she is 11 she will die, but she doesn't. Instead, when she's 11, she gets whisked off to Nevermore by Jupiter North, and she gets put into these trials to join a local kind of magical society. It is a beautiful series. There are 3 out. We're expecting the 4th one at the end of the year, and yeah, really well written, really fun. Just absolutely love this series. So I would highly recommend Jessica Townsend as an Australian author as well. I'm not going to recommend any further books, but I will just mention a few different Australian authors that you might want to look into as well. So we have Lynette Noni, who wrote the Prison Healer series and the, I can't remember what it's called. I'll put an image of the first one up here so you can see it anyway. We also have Jay Kristoff and Amy Kaufman, both Australian authors. Both write books together, and also obviously Jay Kristoff writes books on his own as well. So any book by either Jay Kristoff or Amy Kaufman or together would count for this prompt as well. We also have Leanne Moriarty, Garth Nix, Pip Williams, Jack Heath, Ellie Marnie, Matthew Riley and Crystal Sutherland. There are so many other Australian authors that you could definitely use for this prompt, but those are just a few that you might want to look into if you get Australian author as a prompt. Okay, I'm going to now move into one of the prompts that I think is probably the most controversial, I guess we'll say, and that is takes place on an island. I've had a few different people comment in the Discord that they aren't looking forward to potentially getting that prompt. So I just wanted to address what that kind of means. So basically, any part of the story, doesn't have to be the entire story, any part of the story needs to take place on an island. However, it doesn't have to be a small island. So Australia, for example, is both an island nation and a continent. So it's the only country in the world that is a continent, and also the island is the whole country. So any of the authors that I talked about, if a book of theirs takes place in Australia, then it takes place on an island because Australia is technically an island. So The Dry takes place in Australia, it would count for this prompt. The Yield takes place in Australia, it would count for this prompt. The Boy from the Mish would count for this prompt. Big Little Lies by Leanne Moriarty, and most of Leanne Moriarty's books take place in Australia, so they would work. Tasmania, where I live, is part of Australia, but it's also its own island state. So you could read a book that takes place in Tasmania and it would count for this prompt. An example of a couple of books from Tasmania are The Bluffs and The Deep, both written by Kyle Perry. They are both mystery thrillers, I've only read The Bluffs, but I really enjoyed it, so I would recommend it, but also his other book, The Deep. Both of those take place in technically Australia, but also Tasmania, which is an island state as part of Australia, so either way it's an island. Also, other countries that are islands, we have Britain, so United Kingdom, and we also have Ireland. So any books that are set in either of those places technically are in an island. So you could read A Good Girl's Guide to Murder series by Holly Jackson. You could read any of the Brown Sisters trilogy by Talia Hibbert. They all take place in the UK, so therefore that's an island. So any books that take place in the UK and or Ireland work as taking place on an island. So yeah, essentially any book that takes place in a country that is an island itself would work. But you can also read books that take place on an island that is a little island, so a small island in a country. So I've written here, for example, The Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society by Mary Ann Schaefer. So this takes part technically in Britain, but it takes place on the island of Guernsey, which is in the English Channel. So it is its own little island, so that would work. We Were Liars by E. Lockhart takes place on a small island. I think it's off the coast of Maine or somewhere like that in the US, so it would work as a book that takes place on an island. Anne of Green Gables takes place on Prince Edward Island, which is off the coast of Canada, so it would work, or any of the books that are in that series would work as a book that takes place on an island. And then There Were None by Agatha Christie takes place on an island off the coast of Britain, as does a retelling of Then There Were None, which is The Guest List by Lucy Foley, which also takes place on an island off the coast of Britain, so they would work. Jurassic Park by Michael Crichton. Now, some of this does take place not on an island, but the majority of the story takes place on a small island off the coast of, I can't remember where in South America, but off the coast of South America. So Jurassic Park would work as a book that takes place on an island. Circe by Madeline Miller. Most of Circe's life, she lives on an island in Greece, so it would work as a book that takes place on an island. So basically, yeah, you've got quite a few options. It sounds like it would be more tricky than it is, but there's actually quite a few options that you could use. And like I said, only some of the book needs to take place on an island, not the whole thing. Okay, so the next two prompts that I'm going to talk about are published in the 1980s and published before 1900, because those are the two that are probably the most tricky after the others that I've spoken about, and then that will be all of the recommendations for this video. However, please do jump into the Discord and ask specifically for recommendations for any of the prompts. There is a channel which is book recommendations, so if you put the prompt in there that you're struggling with and ask for a rec, anyone can then respond and give you a rec that would work. But yes, published before 1900. So there are a number of classics that were published before 1900. So for example, anything written by Jane Austen, all of which were published in the 1800s, would work for this prompt. So Pride and Prejudice, Sense and Sensibility, Northanger Abbey, Mansfield Park, Persuasion, or Emma. Any one of those would work because they were all published before 1900. Anything written by the Bronte sisters, so for example, Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte or Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte would both work, and anything else by any of the other Brontes because they were all published before 1900. Anything by Charles Dickens was published before 1900 as well, so you could read Great Expectations, you could read A Christmas Carol, anything else by Dickens. You could also read Dracula by Bram Stoker or Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. Or you could go back even further and read the Iliad or the Odyssey by Homer, which are Greek poems and legends. There are any number of books. I just googled published before 1900 and came up with most of these, but yeah, there are quite a few. So there's some examples, but I would suggest googling. But like I said, you can always pop your question into the Discord, into that book recommendations channel, and see what people come up with. Okay, so published in the 1980s, this is the last prompt that I'm going to talk about. First of all, I am running the read-along of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy series. We are reading the entire series, and there is some amazing co-hosts as well. I will link my announcement video in the description below, so you can go and check that out if you would like to. But the book that we need to read in March is Life, the Universe and Everything, and it was published in the 1980s. So you could join us and read that book, and you would be reading a book published in the 1980s. The only book that was not published in the 80s was the first one, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. It was originally published in 1979, so that's the only one that wouldn't work, but the rest would work, except for the one written by Owen Colfer, but we're not reading that in March anyway. We're reading Life, the Universe and Everything, so please consider joining us. Also published in the 1980s was Beloved by Toni Morrison. Roald Dahl was publishing his books in the 1980s, so Matilda, SEO Trot, The BFG, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, any of those books by Roald Dahl. The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood was published in the 1980s, and in fact I think that a lot of books by Margaret Atwood were published in the 1980s, so please check out some of her other books as well. The Colour Purple by Alice Walker was also published in the 1980s, so again there are quite a few that you could choose from. I just googled as well, so please feel free to do that also. But like I said, that is the end of the video. We have been talking for quite some time, so I think we might call it quits there. But as I've said a few times now, please do go and join the Discord and put any questions you have about anything that you are confused about in the Discord. And we do have a specific book recommendations channel where you could go ahead and get all of the recs that you need for the different prompts. But yeah, that is everything that I'm going to talk to you about today. I really hope you're going to join me playing Roll of Reads. Please do comment below and let me know if you are interested in joining. If you have joined already, please let me know if this video was helpful. That would be really good to know as well. If you'd like to leave me a comment but you don't know what, then leave me a kind of shrugging emoji, because we were a little bit unsure about some things. So yeah, leave me the little shrug. All of my social media details and, like I said, the information about the Readathon are linked in the description below, so please go ahead and check me out on all those different places and also get all the information about the Readathon. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, I would absolutely love it if you would subscribe to my channel and give this video a thumbs up. And yeah, like I said, thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you next time.